That's Business News. I'm Joy Uzo. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Joy Uzo, for Business News on Good Morning Nigeria. Next is a review of some of the papers we have this morning.
Thanks, Da, for joining us on the newspaper review. And our newspaper reviewer, Bayo, is here. Good morning, Bayo.
Thank you, Juma. Good morning. Good morning, Kinsley.
Yeah, Bayo.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Good to see you.
So we begin with the Daily Trust. Under the nameplate, we have INEC begins deployment of sensitive material. That's on page 3. And top trade services boom as Nigeria head to polls. That's on page 17. Our headline is APC, PDP clash as police redeploy commissioners. Lagos, Kano, Kwara, Imo, others gets new CPs. And then the picture message is the redeployed and retained commissioner of police and where they are going. Picture message. And on the bottom plate of the Daily Trust, we have strike. ASU, FG resume meeting today. That's on page 10. The 2019 polls, PDP threatens to pull out of peace accord. That's on page 13. And Enconium as Ohinoi of Iberaland clocks 90. That's on page 8. Kinsley.
All right, let's take a look at the Daily Sun newspaper. Daily Sun, beside the name flag, El-Rufai adamant on warning to foreigners. With 2 riders, Kaduna governor defending Nigeria's sovereignty. That's according to his aide. And outrage greets alleged threat to international community. Details of that can be found on page 6. And you also have there, just below the nameplate, you have the countdown marker, 2019, Nigeria votes, 9 days to February 16th. One of the headlines there with the story on page 42, Northern Youths stakeholders endorse Atiku. And another one on page 12, 2019, I provide security to ensure free, fair elections. That's according to incumbent President Buhari. This story says with a double-decker headline and a rider, U.S. dispatches Clinton to meet Buhari and Atiku. An ex-president, that's Clinton, on mission to get candidates' commitment to peace. Now, the photograph on the front page there shows the president and the governors of Benue and Plateau State on the arrival of the president at Makurdi yesterday in the course of his campaign. Now, below that, 2019 elections again, that's another kicker. Customs intercepts bales of police uniforms and tear gas canisters. That's page 4. Oil drilling to commence in Benue soon. That's according to the federal government with a rider, APC deceiving Nigerians, according to Atiku. Wike to UK envoy. Watch Nigeria's polls closely. Details of that can be found on page 40. Federal government must resolve ASU crisis now. That's according to Senate President Saraki. Details on page 12. Bayon.
Well, let's start with the statement by the People's Democratic Party. It says that it might be forced to review its signature to the National Peace Accord. This is over comments by Governor El-Rufai of Kaduna State warning foreigners to stay clear of the internal affairs of Nigeria. The People's Democratic Party says the statement from the governor of Kaduna State, especially mentioning body bags, is in bad taste. The party is saying that the comments, the threat, and incendiary action are inimical to peaceful, free, and fair election. In the statement by the spokesman for the governor, El-Rufai, he says the governor was warning about the consequences of meddling in the internal affairs of the country. Samuel Arua, who is the spokesman, described the reaction of the People's Democratic Party as a false outrage, as Governor El-Rufai is firmly committed to peace. The European Union has made a pronouncement, and it says it will review the security situation of its personnel invited to monitor the elections. It says this is the 6th time the EU is monitoring elections in Nigeria since 1999, and it has always been at the invitation of the Independent National Electoral Commission. The mission reiterates that it is impartial and operate in strict accordance with the code of election monitoring. Meanwhile, the presidency has also made a pronouncement. It says that the Kaduna State Governor, the APC, and all the candidates have reposed their faith in democracy for the purposes of the general election. So there is nothing more to sneeze at. Well, the word of caution here is cooling the temper, because 9 days to election, tempers are high, the suspicion has been heightened, and words are like eggs. When they drop, you can't pick them up again. And so our elders, political leaders, particularly the forerunners in the contest, should be very careful of what they say. If you want to withdraw from peace, the alternative is certainly violence or war. And if you talk about body bags are associated with death. So these are words that semantically, they tend to create an atmosphere of confusion. And so our leaders need to be very, very careful. The 9 days left to the first of the national elections should come in with a peaceful atmosphere. Meanwhile, as part of the preparations for the elections, the Independent National Electoral Commission says it has deployed sensitive and non-sensitive electoral material to the states. The INEC Commissioner in charge of Information and Voter Education, Festus Okoye, says for the materials, some items like ballot boxes, voting cubicles, and writing materials that are described as less sensitive material have been deployed to states and local government. It means all the 36 states of the Federation and the FCT, as well as the 447 local governments of Nigeria, will have those materials. The sensitive materials have been delivered to the central bank at the state level, and the sensitive materials are ballot papers and result sheets. The commissioner also made a remark. You recall the burning of PVC in Abuja. He says, while condemning the criminality involved, he says, if possible, within available time, INEC will do a reprint to enable the voters collect them before time. On voting day, it will be simultaneous accreditation and voting.
Yeah, I recall, was it yesterday or yes, on Tuesday that you discussed the Abuja arson incident and yes, what the supplementary steps might be for those whose PVCs were burnt, in the course of that fire. Just as well that there's reassurance, for those who who have not collected their PVCs from that particular locality, that they just might be able to have access to a PVC. Yes. But the most important thing is go collect your PVC. The deadline ends tomorrow, I believe.
Yes. Yes,
well, in their own case, probably it might be an extension.
That is in their own case, but nationwide it ends tomorrow.
Yes. What about their temporary voter card? I think they can use it since it's a case of arson and they've lost their PVCs. I think those with temporary voter cards can,
the features of the temporary voter card as we used to have them would not suffice.
May not be amenable to
the card reader. Current.
Yes. The moment you have a permanent voter's card, temporary voters cards become invalid.
Absolutely.
Again, there was this headline Kingsley read about spat over deployment of police. Actually, it is comments emanating from political parties. However, the deployment came from the approval for the Police Services Commission for the deployment of 36 commissioners of police and 1 for the FCT. The chairman of the Police Service Commission, retired IGP Muslim Smith, charged the Nigeria Police Force to settle down at their commands, particularly the commissioner that have been posted, and ensure that the elections that we are getting into is peaceful, free, fair, and transparent. The approval has also has been conveyed by the Inspector General of Police for implementation. In the same vein, the police is also to prune down the number of personnel that are attached to special protection unit as well as counter-terrorism units attached to personalities. The Acting Inspector General of Police, Mohammed Adamu, says it is to ensure a mobilization of personnel to support the INEC and the NYC staff who will be engaged in the elections.
Bayo, there are two stories. Unfortunately, two of the stories are buried inside the Daily Sun, which is understandable on account of politics. But you recall, I read a lead story from the Daily Sun and says U.S. dispatches Clinton to meet Buhari and Atiku. But of course, it says ex-president on mission to get candidates' commitment to peace. This is under the auspices of the National Peace Committee, convened by Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka, but chaired by former military head of state, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, with the vice chair being Ebitu Okiwe. That sometime next week it is expected that the political parties, of course, will be called again to further the National Peace Accord, which was endorsed in December last year, to say, look, elections are just a few days away, have a commitment, to accepting the outcome of the elections, and that, of course, is expected to take place in Abuja. The visit of Clinton, for this particular purpose, as well as an international figure to prevail on the parties, is very significant. Because if you also recall, in 2015, ahead of the general elections, we had with us in Nigeria on that occasion, one of the witnesses to the signing of the peace accord in January of that year, the late Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations at some point in his life, yes. The other story before you, but you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, all I wanted to say was that it's coming in time, and it's very timeless in the sense that there's a need to refrain and remind everybody about the commitment to peace, because we cannot have election except we have a peaceful atmosphere. And the concerns expressed by the People's Democratic Party, especially emanating from comments. And it must be observed that the comments from the political parties, rather than tackle issues, be very incendiary and are creating an atmosphere of tension in the nation. So all these efforts towards peace cannot be overemphasized.
All right, Bayo. As I said, Juma, you have the editorial, but just before we take the editorial, there are two stories that are tucked inside. NLC, Nigerian Labour Congress, had their own elections. If you recall, 4 years ago, it was acrimonious.
Yes.
The venue at that time was the International Conference Center, same venue this time. But 4 years ago, everything was upside down, and you had the NLC split down the middle. But now they've, of course, come together and been able to re-elect Ayuba Waba as the leader of the umbrella Labour Congress, that's to say the NLC, for the next 4 years.
But the election was unanimous, and it trickled down. All the 15 members of the executive were returned unopposed. It's different from what happened 4 years ago, when in fact the election of Ayuba Waba saw protests from other factions of the union. And Ayuba Waba used the occasion to reassure workers that he will follow up through with the minimum wage issue. They also called on the federal government to protect the minimum wage from tax.
Tax?
Yes.
How is that possible?
It's possible because...
by policy. By policy.
Well, all he's advocating for is that the benefits that will accrue to workers from the 30% increase is not taken away by the subsequent review of tax. Simple.
Yeah, usually the government from time to time would exempt certain categories of workers from taxation, to say that the tax incidence will begin from grade level usually grade level 1, grade level 2. There's no more grade level 1 in the federal civil service, by the way. So perhaps it's also part of the target of the NLC. That is, if they get the 30,000. The other story I was talking about, Bayo, has to do with President Buhari signing into law a bill on the consumer protection. Yes. We already see that by virtue of the bill, the Consumer Protection Council Act has been repealed, and also sections 118 to 128 of the Investment and Securities Act. So what is now created is a Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, as well as Consumer Protection Tribunal, to try violations. And I'm sure because in the heat of electioneering, nobody is paying close attention to this. We're going to see in the coming weeks and months.
And I think it's a bold initiative to protect the consumer, so that when your consumption rights are violated, you have a recourse to drag. If you recall, of recent, there have been conflict Nigerians who have suffered a lot of poor services, particularly from some foreign airlines. And the Consumer Protection Council had to go inside. Now with this development, there is an avenue to seek legal redress for poor services for consumers.
I think that's a great path the FG is taking. Nigerians can now at least have a place to go and take their complaints for losing money over bad business. Moving on, we have the editorial from the independent newspaper, Daily Independent, and is FG's new revenue initiative. It begins in this way. In a bid to grow the economy, the federal government last week launched the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. Part of the objective of the strategy is to, among other things, tax luxury goods, increase the value-added tax VAT, and introduce excise duty on carbonated drinks and cut import duties on importation. Taxing luxury goods, apart from curbing ostentatious consumption, can help government raise money from the rich who are bent on consuming luxury goods. Nigerians have a penchant for consuming luxury goods, and this is reflected in global champagne consumption, where Nigeria is among the biggest consumer of the premium drink, expending billions of naira in the process. The same goes for the acquisition of private jets, luxury, bulletproof cars, sprawling houses and villas, among others. By directly exploiting the penchant of Nigeria, government is likely to earn handsomely. And then they said in these indices, especially the PMI, have been good indicators of the direction of the economy so far, against the fact that the PMM is heading south. There is no guessing where the economy, already described as weak in several quarters, is headed. It becomes therefore counterintuitive and dangerous to levy excise tax at a time that the economy requires a boost. It becomes opposite for government to rethink the tax. And they said, while we encourage government to explore every available opportunity to raise revenue, because it is the quantum of revenue that it has that can determine how far it can go in providing infrastructure and meet the basic needs of the citizens. So, Mr. Bayo.
Yes, the editorial is looking at the initiative for revenue generation from two perspectives. Yes. It is good to tax luxury goods, and it actually has observed that for the first quarter of 2017 alone, yes, VAT has risen to about 269 billion naira. That is very encouraging. But however, because the economy is recovering from a recession, the editorial is cautioning that initiatives to impose excise duty can be counterproductive to manufacturing, and therefore, while they are welcoming the initiative to generate revenue, because government will be encouraged to source revenue internally rather than looking outside for loans. And therefore, they are also cautioning that it should not be a disincentive for manufacturing and productivity within the nation that we need to regenerate the economy. So it has to be a balancing act.
Bayo, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Tomorrow will be another day.
Okay, that's Bayo Toyebi there, this is a reviewer for today's edition. We'll take a short break now. When we return, of course, we'll be talking about Nigeria's economic indices and what has happened in recent years.
Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There is no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Medical Mission MMM is offering free services on a wide range of medical issues. Take advantage of these offers, especially by availing yourself of the National Cancer Prevention Program NCPP. You can do so by coming for our Wellness Wednesday program at 31 Bode Thomas Street, Surulere, Lagos every Wednesday from 7 a.m. You also have the opportunity of seeing the specialist and getting expert opinion on any health issues that may have been bothering you. Are you preparing to get married to your sweetheart? Then we have a pre-marital health program that will help you ensure that you start your married life on a healthy footing. Very important health screening and counseling will be made available for you and your partner. You can avail yourself of this opportunity by attending our pre-wedding Wednesday program from 7 a.m. For inquiries, send a mail to info@pinkcruise.org or log on to www.pinkcruise.org or call 0805-633-4288. Mission Pink Cruise, taking wellness to all.
Madam. Brought us as usual.
As usual. You have no problem.
For the three
you are welcome, sir.
As usual, yeah?
Welcome.
You take that one.
Yeah, take that one.
You don't understand? We want Nigerian homegrown rice. Finish. You don't have? You don't have?
Join the rice revolution today.
No other rice that tastes like Nigerian rice. Are you sorry? That's the Nigerian rice we are talking about. Chocolate made in Nigerian rice. Healthy food. I'm going to bring Mrs. Mobo to come to chocolate rice of made in Nigeria here. And see how it are made.
Correct.
And how they are cook it.
Correct.
Homegrown rice are good for your health. It will boost our economy and will give employment to our people.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, joining us in the studio to talk about Nigeria's economic milestones, would like to welcome Mr. Niyi Akinsuji, who is an investment and financial analyst.
A pleasure.
Niyi, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
It was a pleasure, yeah. Thanks so much.
Also here with us in the studios is Aliyu Abdullahi. It's a lawyer and a policy analyst. Aliyu, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Now let's take this background report by Abdul Malik Adewu to set the pace for our discussion this morning.
Nigerian's economy inherently resides as a monocultural-based economy due to its predominance on oil that contributes to the bulk of the country's revenue generation. This has been observed to be a challenge for a country that is naturally endowed with abundance of varied resources that can substantially add to the nation's reserve. Interestingly, economic experts say the reverse is fast becoming the case as the present administration has introduced lots of reforms through the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan ERPG aimed at achieving an all-inclusive and vibrant economic growth. Beyond the security of lives and properties, the earnest desire that prompted Nigerians to elect President Muhammadu Buhari in the 2015 general elections was the need to fight corruption and resuscitate the aligning economy. Though the administration was welcomed by recession, its determination to wriggle the country out through the ERPG, expert says, assisted the country back onto the path of economic growth. With mega resources and a lot to do, the government kept faith with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan ERPG, a development plan that is faithfully implemented to wean the economy off oil and gas by diversifying into other sectors. That, experts say, has started paying off as the country has witnessed successes in agriculture. The geometric rise in the quantity and quality of local rice have saved the country billions of dollars in foreign exchange. The value-added chain in the sector also led to the creation of millions of jobs and wealth to either to a section of the population that had resigned to faith or poverty and helplessness. The mining sector which is also identified to be a viable alternative, is witnessing reforms that are not only attracting investors but also changing the narratives of lacking means plenty, as artisanal miners that used to work hard but gain less are beginning to get the right rewards for their labor and also contributing to the GDP. The hard stance of the government on corruption is also said to be gaining investors' confidence in Nigeria, just like the improvement in the ease of doing business is boosting the economy. Government is affirming its stance on public finance management to include debt recovery, social investment, healthcare, infrastructure provision, access to credit particularly for agricultural sector, power sector funding, aviation, and housing, among others. Despite the fears that the election may increase spending in non-investable ventures, experts say the economy is stable and looks to do very much better later in the year. Will the outcome of the general elections significantly impact the economic outlook for the year 2019? What indices are likely to shape Nigeria's economy this year? This and many more are questions yearning for answers on Good Morning Nigeria shortly.
Abdul Malik Adio, thank you very much for that in-depth background. But just to let our viewers know that the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan is more popularly referred to as ERGP, Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. But once again, let's return to our guests. We earlier introduced them, Nia Kinsiji and Aliu Abdullahi. Let's begin with Nia Kinsiji. We're here talking about economic milestones. Of course, the milestone will indicate that there is a point of origin for an assessment and where you are now in terms of the milestones. What are we talking about or looking at when we try to measure Nigeria's economic milestones?
I think essentially is to also look at the economic environment holistically. And when I say holistically, we have to necessarily do a throwback to that period when this government, came into office, precisely May 29, 2015, and use that as our benchmark, to measure how the economy had developed and the milestones so identified within that period, that is between 2015 and 2019. Essentially, what comes to mind, or what comes to my mind, is the fact that the government, by the character I've ascribed to it, had become a correctional, government in terms of policies and economic policy deployments. By 2015 second quarter, Nigeria was owing its contractors more than 2 trillion naira. Was owing its joint venture partners in the joint venture cash call more than $6 billion. Had accumulated a debt profile of more than $63 billion. Well, again, 27 states were owing staff salaries. So when you look at that, and of course, our GDP had dropped from a high of 8.5 in 2011 to a low of 2.6. In 2015 second quarter. So when the general outlook, from that, it's an economy that is operating under scale. So what it does mean is that you had a situation that was pathetic. That was the only description to it. So when this government came in, I was very sympathetic of the government, because for us it was near a desperate situation. Foreign reserve had also fallen to 29 billion loss. And when you also look at the stock of infrastructure, it was really low, so much that it was estimated at to meet up with the standard average infrastructural stock that is needed, you needed $3 trillion, to realize that. So how would the government go forward, especially with an economic template that was principally consumption-based. And in so many words, in so many descriptions across the world, our economy was described as an import-dependent economy. That was no credible characterization for any kind of economy. So I think the first thing that that impressed me was the fact that the government decided to start paying contractors. And I think the first years, more than 600 billion naira was paid. And to also offset that, another promissory note of more than 1 trillion naira was arranged for the contractors. This helped brought liquidity, to the economic space, and of course provided comfort for contractors that had started, in fact, that had laid off staff and had packed off their equipment out of sites. Then going forward, we now started seeing effort at diversification. Agriculture that had always been the cornerstone, rejected, more or less, we started seeing focused attention on revamping agriculture. And for the first time, I keep saying for the first time, because even when we were in school, the first attraction to economy and the first law is mechanized agriculture, and it was the average economist who always tell you, until you mechanize agriculture, you cannot have economy of scale. But with the coming of the introduction of the Anchor Borrowers Program, it created a direct linkage, between government institution and the smallholders farmers. That is very creative. It was not just creating a bond between the institution and smallholders farmer, but also created a bond between the larger business units, the outgrower program. So that linkage more or less immediately had impact, so much that now, and of course, let me also add that in 2015, we were spending $665 million daily on imports. We were importing virtually everything. But now, we have reduced $665 million daily imports to $163 million daily import. That is, if that is the only achievement this government had been able to achieve, we should congratulate it, because it has also helped in conserving our foreign exchange, our foreign reserve. It has also helped in also creating a new form of stimulus for productive activities, because the introduction of the ban of 42 products not valid for forex had helped to also now impact the local industry, so much that most multinational companies involved in productive activities with the manufacturing sectors are also now doing a vigorous integrated, backward integrated alignment, to source for their raw materials. In the long run, this will also help in providing wealth opportunities for local suppliers, and of course expanding the activities of these manufacturers that will lead to increased job creation. So I think essentially the government had done well by doing this, also directly diversifying the economy. If we are talking of mineral resources, before 2015, the highest sum of money the mineral sector contributed to the economy was just about 700 million naira. Well, now we are reading 3-point-something billion naira. Those are quantum leap, in this consideration. So I think generally the fact of diversifying the economy, and perhaps even more importantly for business operator, the predictability of our foreign exchange rates. Over the last 2-3 years, a planner an investment planner, sorry, can sit down and do a projection, a 24-month projection over, on what he or she wants to do in the economy, because you know there are predictable indices within the economy, predictability of the foreign exchange rate, even predictability of the monetary policy rates, either high or low. You know constantly that this figure will remain, and you can use it to plan. I think it's and once you have a predictable economic space, it makes a better room for economic policy deployment, and like the introductory overview did. All these are ensconced in the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. It means that the government, as it were, is not just doing things haphazardly. There is an organized foundation that is guiding policies and, of course, the implementations of these policies.
That's great. Moving on, Aliu Abdullahi, you're a lawyer and a political analyst, and there have been so many policies that have been initiated by the government. And are you saying, would you say that we are still taking baby steps towards implementing these policies, or did we hit the ground running?
Well, let me take it from where he has said. He virtually almost covered everything, our history, starting from where we're coming from. I believe, you see, the economy as a country, we don't exist in isolation. When you talk about economy, we compete globally with other countries, and let's not get deceived. Even prior to 2015, it wasn't like our economy was actually doing well, because a good economy is that economy that is actually based on a real economy, real economic sector. Meaning when you have a manufacturing sector that is doing well, agri good, but when your economy is based on a service industry, you are bound to hit, some challenges, and especially when you're a mono-dependent economy, when you export only one product, that's oil, In a time like today, when there are actually the whole world is looking for an alternative energy solutions all across the world, and people are finding oils everywhere. Before, Ghana doesn't have oil. Angola's oil was not really prominent before, but now they have almost even overtaken the country. Niger, they didn't have oil before, but now they have oil. So you see, almost everyone is finding oil. America is actually, they are hitting their own reserves, not that they didn't have before. So when you rely on, an entire economy of the kind of population we have on a single product like that, you're bound to have challenges. So even before, it's not as if we were doing great. It's almost like the governments before were shielding us from that hard fact reality. And now, one thing with this government is they didn't want to lie to us, and they don't want to shield us from those realities. And that is why in its effort, they have really come out, and the only way they have opened this thing for us is to diversify the economy into other key sectors. And that answers, that is partly an answer to your question when you said whether the government has hit the ground running. It did, because we have had talk about diversification into agri and other sectors, but we never had the implementation before. We have not seen, we have had, let me give you an instance. Some years back, actually before 2015, I can't remember particularly which year, between maybe 2013 or 2014, there was an economic forum, World Economic Forum that held for the African, that was held here in Abuja. And the theme that here was growth inclusiveness. And the first step to growth inclusiveness is financial inclusion. What does growth inclusiveness means? The World Bank, INEC, and other economic agencies, international bodies found out that one of the critical factors to lift, the people in developing countries, their economy, is to encourage growth inclusiveness. Because, for example, in Nigeria, more than 60% were found not to be accommodated within the financial inclusion, meaning there may be any incomes, but those incomes do not reflect in our GDP and also other economic indices. So the first step is financial inclusion. And I think the government before that of this administration, they try to see, okay, how do we do that? Let us bring a scheme, you know, for the micro, small and medium enterprise, MSME. A particular amount of money, about 220 billion then, was voted specifically for that in the last administration. But do you know, for 4 years in that last administration, that money was actually was virtually inaccessed by members of that particular sector of the economy, that is the MSME. I know of a lot of group of farmers under the auspices of AFAN, All Farmers Association of Nigeria, and so many other groups, market groups, that try to access these schemes under CBN in the last administration, but they couldn't, virtually because of the guideline, the way the guideline was structured. Access to credit from banks of industries, bank of agriculture, is a nightmare. You will spend 2 years. You will be lucky if at the end of the day you were able to access, even with all the consultants in this country. But this is how things began to change after 2015 with this administration. Now, you see, instead of you coming to the government agencies such as CBN, such as Bank of Industry and so on, trying to assess the schemes they have lauded or they have actually informed us about and hitting roadblocks. Now, the government is even coming to you, like the Rice and Cobra Fund, you know, they are coming directly to you. They have simplified the guidelines, the requirements that for people to access it. And the same thing when you go to other development banks such as Bank of Agri and Industry. So these are the policy implementation that we have seen, some of them from this government when it comes to, you know, revamping the economy. And again, when we talk about growth inclusiveness, especially through financial inclusion, we cannot but also talk about the social investment program that this government is also actually targeting. People may see it as just a social welfare program. Maybe it's not an economic program, but it is actually a real economic program, because do you know why? It's directly touching the that sector, that informal sector, those people that ordinarily our GDP calculation, all our economic indices do not consider before. The groundnut sellers, the barrel pushers, truck pushers, and many of those petty traders in our system. But now, with the various schemes under the social investment program, they are being, you know, they are becoming part of the economy, the formal economy. Because when you are given, let's say, a loan, you know, and you have to actually be part of the financial inclusion, you know, through a bank, then it means you have to register an account. And when you register an account, then automatically the system starts capturing you as part of the formal economy. If you go to Uganda, for example, I have seen people in Uganda, a trader, a hawker of maize, you know, corn, that uses electronic devices such as POS to actually charge customers as low as the amount for you to buy corn. But it helps the economy. That she got access to credit when you're in the formal economy, that's one advantage. And the government also is able to tax you appropriately, and that helps the entire economy of the nation. Then the third issue that I want to tell you about the implementation of policy is the infrastructure growth and development that we are seeing that is actually being spread across the entire country. Look at the rail. Before this administration, yes, the last administration has started doing something about rail. No doubt about that. But this administration has taken it to another level. We have seen now from Lagos to Ibadan, it's a totally new project under this administration. At least from Lagos to Abuja, we have seen the Honorable Minister of Transportation has taken a test ride of the rail. Massive infrastructure growth is going in these three sectors: rail, roads, and power. And you know what that means? Government spending. And you know that what that translates to? It translates that the government is pursuing an expansionary economic policy, and hence it's one of the reasons that took us out of recession that we found ourselves early in 2015, and that means it is stimulating the demand and supply in the society, and by extension the economy, because when a laborer who goes to work on a construction site is paid on a daily basis or weekly basis, he has something in his pocket, he will be able to buy bread. The bread seller will buy it from the actually bread manufacturer. The manufacturer will buy flour from the farmer, and the farmer will use that income to buy an okrika. The okrika seller will also buy food. You see, this is how the economy in the society, in the country, is stimulated.
All right. Ali Abdullahi, thank you very much. Let's go over to our Lagos Network Center, where we are being joined by another guest, Babajide Ogunsonwo. Babajide Ogunsonwo, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. And straight away, we're discussing Nigeria's economic milestones. What are your thoughts?
I would like to start from a slightly different perspective before we go into milestones, and that's because there's one part of the Constitution that is the most important part of the Constitution. There's one part of the Constitution, of the Nigerian Constitution, that we should be proud of. One part of the Constitution that we need to defend. There's one part of the Constitution, the most important part, that should be enforced. Now, what is this part of this Constitution? During our discussion, I'll share that part with you, and whatever happens, please remind me to tell you about that one part of the Constitution that we must be proud of. But before then, before we start discussing the economic milestones, I want to discuss about the three myths of the economy. The three myths of the economy. The first is leadership and government is the genesis of the problem. The first myth is leadership is the genesis of our economic problems. The second myth is there's one political party or one candidate that has a solution to our problems. And the third myth is that if we look at what is going on, the third myth emphasizes that government can help us. So let's start with the first myth, which goes around that leadership is the genesis of Nigeria's problems, which is a myth. And the simple argument that I want to make this morning is that leadership has a role to play, but leadership is not the genesis of our problems. And here's why. Let's look at the journey so far. 1960, when we gained independence, what was our population? Based on all available information, Nigeria's population in 1960 was 45 million. The population of the United Kingdom, where we gained independence from, was 52 million. In other words, in 1960, the United Kingdom had a population that was greater than ours. Now, let's look at...
all right, Mr. Babajide Ogunsonwo, sorry, we have to break in here. You know, you joined the conversation midway, and before you know it, we'll be wrapping up the conversation. We have two other guests with us here in the Abuja studios. I know you're getting now into our demographic crisis. Nigeria hitting 198 million, pushing almost to 200 million. And we have had cause to also say it on this program that the number of persons that have been added to Nigeria's population since 2006, when we had our last population census, is more than the entire population of South Africa. But earlier, as a foundational statement, you we're saying that there is an aspect of the Constitution that we must respect. But of course, it is clear that every word in that Constitution must be respected. But if that was your foundation, could you take us back into that critical aspect, you know, as a prompt, or rather as a pedestal for your contribution on the conversation surrounding the economic milestones?
I know you're waiting for that aspect. But here's why the population is important. The UK's population in the last 60 years has grown by only 15 million. Nigeria's population has grown by 155 million in the last 6 decades. In simple terms, the amount of revenue available to the government in 1960 was significantly more than what is available to us today. So while leadership is important, the population growth, things that you and I have caused, is the genesis of the problem, while leadership is the revelation, is the last chapter. Leadership has not been so effective in managing this crisis. But again, because you want to hear that part of the Constitution that is important, and that is in Section 16, Section 1B, that states that the government must control the economy in such a way as to secure maximum, the emphasis is on maximum welfare. Here's what it means for us. It means that as Nigerians, you do not have the right to be poor. It is a crime for a Nigerian to be poor. And so we need to be able to measure and focus on how have we been able to improve the progress of getting people out of poverty. And there are several ways we could look at this. We could first of all look at 3 areas that the government is making progress on. We could look at 3 areas that we are not yet making progress on. And there's one delicate area that if we start to talk about today, you probably wouldn't focus on those 3 other areas that we're making progress and we still need to make progress on, and that's corruption. So today, let's not talk about corruption because that will take all of our time. I'll start with the 3 areas that we are still not making so much progress on. Housing. Housing, we still need to do much more. Presently, out of all the homes we have in Nigeria, less than 10% are based on mortgages. And so when we look at our journey so far on housing, we see that there still needs to be so much more done in providing homes for the people and ensuring that people have facilities and access to credit to be able to get mortgages. That is one area that we still need to make progress on. Health. The top 3 killer diseases in Nigeria are still malaria, diarrhea, and HIV. Do we still need to make progress in health? Oh yes, we need to make so much and significant progress in health. And then let's look at the challenges we have in unemployment. Here's the truth. The main issue we have with unemployment is not that we are creating jobs, it's not that we are not creating jobs, it's that every day in Nigeria, an additional 15,000 people enter the labor force. In simple terms, every day, 15,000 Nigerians are looking for jobs, an additional 15,000. And so we see why we've got challenges in job creation. And so if we look at progress so far in the last 4 years, areas that we need to improve on, health, areas that we need to improve on, job creation, and if you look at areas that we need to improve on, housing. But now let's focus on the 3 areas that we seem to be making success on. We are making success on security based on the Global Terrorism Database that is issued by the University of Maryland, which offers the most credible data on fighting terrorism. We noticed that from their own report, deaths due to terrorism in 2004 peaked. 7,800 people died. The Global Terrorism Database shows that in 2017, deaths due to terrorism had reduced from 7,800 in 2014 to 1,800. So are we making progress based on that report? Oh yes, we are making significant progress on security. What about food? Here's the facts. Just 4 years ago, the information available is that we spent over $1 billion importing rice. That figure is now down to $19 million. Kingsley, in other words, the amount of money that we used importing rice 4 years ago is sufficient for us to now, if we choose to, import rice for 50 years. So that is significant progress. Let's look at another item that families use, sugar. Again, based on the information we have available, we're making progress on that. Sugar import bill has gone down by half. Our import bill as well on items like wheat and milk has significantly reduced. So yes, we've seen imports on those key items reduce, which means we are making progress. And on infrastructure as well, that is the third area that we've seen progress in the last 3 years. Infrastructure, we've seen more investments. The information available now is that the spending on infrastructure, when I'm talking about, when we look at the budget and the actual spend on works by the Ministry of Works, Power and Housing, has tripled what it was 4 years ago. So we're in a position where we can easily tell ourselves that on housing, health, and employment, we need to make more progress. But on the issues of security, food import bill, and infrastructure, we've made significant progress.
All right, Mr. Ogunsowo, thank you very much. This section 16 of the Constitution you were talking about, you said that is the most important aspect of the provision of the Constitution that we must respect. Thank you very much for that proposition, but I'm sure you are also familiar with the jurisprudence relating to Chapter 2 of our Constitution. And Chapter 2, of course, covers fundamental principles and fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy. Assuming that section that you said is the most important and the one that we must observe because it pertains to Nigerians, what then happens to Chapter 3, which deals with citizenship? So if you don't resolve that, how then can the citizens benefit from the provisions of Section 16? And assuming their rights are also infringed upon, which Chapter 4 deals with, what then do you do? And then you go back again to Sections 4, 5, and 6, dealing with the establishment of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, and all of that is rubbish. What happens? So you can see how significant it is to indeed be respectful of all the provisions of the Constitution. But regardless, we'd like to thank you for the other perspectives you brought in with regard to the data on imports and how we have seen a climb down in the figures. We're back again to our studios here. Maybe Akusiji, you were listening to the guests in Lagos, and of course you also listened to Aliyu Abdullah here with us in the studios. Earlier, you were talking about milestones in terms of numbers. Well, the question always would arise, fine, what is the impact therefore on the well-being and welfare of citizens?
Well, it's also the numbers that would amplify this impact. One of my favorite numbers, it's 112 million poor people, not just only poor people, but poor people living under the poverty line, as stated in 2012 by the World Bank. Now, the incidental to that was that was a time when we had the average crude oil price, between $100 and $140. Now, and of course, going in alignment with the fundamental principle of states, as we're going to pick objectives of states,
The directive principles of state policy. Yeah.
It's about the rights of the average Nigerian to a good life. When you have 112 million people living under the poverty line, it does translate to the fact that this set of people are marginalized. The right of citizenship have been removed from them. But by now we see a new figure, 87 million, people. Now, if it does mean that if we subtract from 125 million, more than 20 million people have been circled out of poverty. I want to give thanks to the social investment program for achieving that. It is not only the social investment program that achieves that, because there are basic theories and applications in circling out poor people, out of the poverty cycle. It also means that the increase in our GDP had also been impacting on the population of poor in the country. We have a major problem, however, the problem of unemployment. But for me, I think because unemployment figures are lagging figures, they come after policies have been implemented. And as I see all these policies that have been implemented, sorry, let me go back to the choice of modeling, because modeling is important in economic calibration. And what I'm saying is the choice of model that a government adopts is as important as the implementation. It is very important. In 2016, when the government decided to employ or to adopt and adapt the ARGP, Egypt, our peer in North Africa, adopted the IMF policies. The cornerstone of the IMF policy was removal of subsidy, open your economy to the forces of demand and supply, and of course free float your currency. Essentially, Nigeria refused, because IMF approached Nigeria, to adopt its policies. The choice before Nigeria then would be remove subsidy on petroleum, open your borders to any form of products, to be imported into your country. But this government, as it were, refused that, and that is why we congratulated. A number of adherents of the Bretton Woods institutions would disagree. But we say there is an application of originality, indigenously evolved policies. When Egypt adopted the IMF programs, within 6 months, its inflation rate rocketed to 35%. At the same way, virtually the same months, when we started the ERGP application, adaptation, ours went to as high as 18%, 18.27%. But within 18 months, we came down to 11+%. That's our inflation rate. Egypt came to 14%. Now, what that tells me is that we are doing better in terms of price impact, on products. And when you reduce price impact on products, it impacts the common people. And that's where I'm coming from. How this policy is, how these policies are affecting the Nigerian people, not even the Nigerian poor. Now, at the time, in January 2017, when our inflation rate was 18.27 at the highest, food inflation rate was 23%. And at that time, of course, everybody was more or less screaming. Life was difficult. Prices of food was very high, But now, the same rate had fallen to a low of 13+. In fact, it just moved. It was on the margin of 12.50 plus, and of course, because of a number of issues, it improved to 13. It moved to 13.4 or something in the last figures. Now that tells you there is a clear reduction, and I can say that at that time, January 2017, a bag of rice was going for 23,000 naira, even some 24,000 naira. From financial derivative figures, we can say that rice, the current average rate of rice across Nigeria is 15,000 naira. And in fact, it oscillated between 15,000 and 17,000 over the last 6-7 months. It's an obvious bridging, of inflation rates. And perhaps more impressive is the fact that we now have a productivity revamp, in the economy. It was talking about MSMEs, a segment of the economy that has been established as the most important segment, because that is where you have the average Nigerian, engaging in business and enterprises of all sorts, and also will be able to employ people in their units. It may be 2, 3, 4, 5 people. So going forward, I am feeling that the government is still evolving, is still correcting the anomalies of the past. Because when you ask the question, what model had been the Nigerian economic model before 2015? We were not into free float in the real sense of it. But at the same time, we opened our borders for everything. Now we can talk of Nigerian rice farmers. We can talk of Nigerian fish farmers. because the money, the outlay on our fish import had also crashed by more than 80%. And of course, we have these resources. We had always had these resources, body of waters everywhere around us. We were not exploiting them, you know. Some of us are thankful, you know, that there's this shift in 2015, and it's very obvious, it's clear, to a more productive, capacitated economy. If we were going the way we were coming, you know, perhaps Venezuela would have just been a short play by now for us. Because an economy that is not driven by productivity is an economy that is just floating. It is not an economy that has character. So now we can start talking of made in Nigeria for exports. The made in Nigeria for export is grounded in the fact that we have our own productive line. And hopefully, in the next 2, 3, 4 years, we should be able to start feeding our country, even if it's just in rice. By the time we start feeding our country 100%, it means that we have allowance to start exporting rice, even if it's just to the sub-region, to the West African sub-region. Already, there are efforts to start exporting yams. We've been hearing about that. There was a time when containers come into Nigeria, bringing imported goods, and they go back empty, without nothing. It shows the balance of trade, the profile of your balance of trade. But now we can see ships, vessels coming in and taking things out. It may not be at the same level with what it brought in, but it does mean that if we are paying so much, it also means that when our goods goes out, we are also taking so much. So the balance of trade prospect is getting stronger, and I think that is a major milestone. You know, I think we should. I want to stop at this point.
All right, Naya Kinsuji, thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's take a short break now. When we return, we'll take some of the tweets that we have and then continue with the conversation.
Can I have the remote, please? It's time to watch my favorite channel.
I'm so sorry, my dear. I really need to continue watching this program on the Nigerian economy.
All this talk about our economy, what is really going?
A lot has happened over the last 3 years.
Really?
Federal government's policies on prudent management of funds and foreign exchange, efficient collection of taxes and custom duties, TSA, BVN, ghost workers elimination, procurement process, empowerment of anti-corruption agencies, and the diversification of the economy.
Okay, so the results?
Now, all this has allowed the policies increase our foreign exchange reserve and internally generated revenue, blocked leakages, provided funds to execute new projects nationwide, and complete projects abandoned by past administration.
I didn't know all this,
Now you know.
The growth of the Nigerian economy is a solid commitment of the federal government. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Chief. Good morning, sir. You are here already?
No, now my spirit day, my body day for house. What kind of question is that? Were you not the one that fixed this meeting for 8 a.m.? You are now coming by 10 a.m. and start asking me jab question.
But Chief, now, I'm sorry. Don't you also go late for meetings sometimes? You know now, African time.
No more African time. And no more pancaking of face during office hours. At the end of the day, we will lose valuable time. We will not make progress. If we want to move this nation forward, we must treat business as business and respect time. Change begins with me.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry. Can we go for the meeting now, Chief?
Better.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Welcome back to Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live from Abuja. I'm now going to Aliu Abdullahi. The policies of government have always been prudent financial management at its inception when it came into office. And looking at the global and local fundamentals, what are the factors that have largely affected decision-making in terms of keeping the economy afloat and in managing public expenditure? Could you point out some of these unsung steps that help checkmate wastages and leakages in the system?
Thank you so much, Jimmy. When you really look at what this government did when it came in terms of prudent financial management and also checking leakages and loopholes, you cannot help but start from the very beginning. And that's, you see, there are multiple of those approaches, but let's start with the adoption or implementation of the Treasury single account in the country. One may see it like as a tool for the fight against corruption, but it's also an economic tool because it really helps. Like, for example, we have established from the very beginning that our major source of income, was oil money. There was a time when this President Muhammad Buhari, at the beginning of this administration, requested to know the accounts of the Nigerian oil company, and they were giving him numbers of accounts, about 80 something, and even at then the managers of that NNPC said that number was not exhaustive. That meaning there were other accounts they even could not really point out to Mr. President, and he said, no, we can't have that happening. He said the Treasury single account, corporations, agencies, that earn or even not have to really have a one account domiciled in the central bank, so that at least the government is aware of every money that is coming in and what actually goes out. There was a time, that some agencies that were supposed to be remitting money to government corpus, they don't even do that. Years in, years out, they although they made the money, it's not like they didn't make the money, but they haven't actually remit anything. And I'll give you an example. There is JAMB. We know JAMB have sold funds to students going to universities for years, actually. But there were particular years in the last administration that they remitted zero kobo to the government corpus, So, but with this government, we have seen billions of naira that agencies like JAMB have been remitting. And other agencies that actually earn income, they have been surpassing their projected expected earnings, such as the Nigerian Custom, such as the Federal Inland Revenue Service, and so on. So that is one tool of blocking loophole, and leakages. Now, you also talk about other issues that the government did to address this, the prudent financial management. I was just reading a report just about, I think, 2 days back, where it is recorded that the amount of money the government has saved in 2 years, in 2017 and 18, from the public service, from the payment, from the careful, administration of all the policies and the IPPS. Not that the past government didn't do it, of course they did it, but this government took it to another level. They saved about 200 billion, right? 70 billion in 2017 and 130 billion in 2018. And that is a significant amount of money. That's also another thing that the government is doing. Now, government have decided to cut wastes, you know. You see, earlier, before this administration, we have this kind of flamboyant lifestyle. I once wrote an article, actually, during the hunger, not this one, the last one. I was there with the delegation of the Nigerian delegation. And we saw what really happened. There was a significant change. The 2 years before this administration, the reported number of people that followed the government delegation was about 570-something people. Actually said by the Nigerian ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Amin Wali, it was a record. But when this administration came, they went to the UN General Assembly in 2017 with less than 100 people, even with all the government ministries and agencies. And you see, this is what I call change. So the amount of waste, you know, and leakages that this government is cutting, it adds to the prudent financial management of the resources. Because if you don't actually, you know, if you don't really take care of the small resources you have, you cannot do anything with it for the larger group of the society or of the population. That is now what we are beginning to see. This government is doing more with very, very less than what other governments has actually been earning. And we've had the vice president, and he's very right on that. With the kind of funds that was budgeted, appropriated, and also released to the capital projects. That's very important. We cannot overemphasize that particular area, because if you don't develop those critical factors of your infrastructures, nothing what we are saying about the economy can't take off. The foreign direct investment can't come in. The local investment will not also spoil. And if we address the key infrastructures, even the interest rates, such as critical component for investment, can come down, where you and I can actually take our little savings and also invest in the economy. But those cannot come down. Those indices of the economy that can help me and you to invest can come down if the infrastructure is not built. So that is also the area that this government is doing quite well. And for this government for us to witness where we want to go as a country economically, I think we have to continue on this trajectory of growing our infrastructure, of diversifying our economy, of the prudent financial resources, the scarce, may I add, resources that we have. Because with the kind of population that we have, we really have scarce resources. That's the truth about it. And that's the fundamentals of economy. There is no country or anybody that will tell you, I have enough resources. I have all what I want. No, you never have enough of what you want to do. All you need to do is, how do you manage with the little you have to actually gain the most that you want? Exactly,
Aliu Abdullahi, but we'd like to take the tweets because Nigerians are talking on the topic. And we begin with the tweet from Law Alpha C. The agricultural revolution policy of the present government has successfully diversified the economy and brought it in its wake employment.
This is still from Law Alpha. It says the local content policy implementation of the present administration has impacted positively on the economy, making us export-oriented and gradually self-reliant.
Okay, and Usaini Baba Mai says Nigeria's economy is something broad that needs more time to be revived when collapsed. I believe that the present administration will change it.
Akeju Olagbaju tweets, says the Nigerian economy is still a mixed bag. The ERGP, if properly implemented, particularly hopefully with regard to areas of agriculture, manufacturing and infrastructure, we will see dramatic improvements in the economy. All right, so those are the tweets that we have. Yeah.
gentlemen.
You'll be joining in Lagos.
Yeah.
And our guest in Lagos, Mr. Ogunsayo, is there. We're talking about the fundamentals of prudent financial management and looking at the global and local fundamentals. What's your take on that?
This is the period where we need to be able to manage our resources most efficiently. And that's because even from the CBN's outlook as well, foreign exchange stability is going to be the priority for this year. So the question is, why is foreign exchange stability going to be priority? And that's because globally, estimates from the International Monetary Fund, estimates from the World Bank shows that the expected global growth this year will be lower than last year. And so there's a potential for foreign investors to want to take out capital from the country. And so foreign exchange stability will be priority, and it becomes more important for us to be able to manage the limited resources we have when it comes to revenue, to be able to deploy such revenue into the right places. Let's look at the federal government's revenue at the moment. We've seen consistent decline in federal government revenue, but despite this decline, we've seen a lot of investment going into critical sectors like infrastructure, works power, and housing. And so I'd mentioned earlier that we've seen investment in infrastructure triple what it was previously. But there are other three things that we need to focus on as well. Let's look at what is going on with the social investment program. We've seen investments to over 300,000 individuals under the conditional cash transfer. We've seen another investment into Npower for over 500,000 young graduates that allows them to be able to be productive. Again, for the CBN, to be able to prudently manage the scarce resources, a lot of investment has gone into managing micro, small, medium, and medium-sized enterprises. And so over 1 million MSMEs are getting interest-free loans from the central bank. But perhaps the largest is the over 9 million school children that are being fed today. If you look at all of this, it is good news. Is it great news? Oh yes, it is not yet great news, but we need to keep on making progress. Are there areas that we need to focus on? Oh, certainly there are areas we need to focus on. If we look at our GDP growth right now, there are some sectors that are doing well, but there are some sectors that are still weak. So agricultural crop production is doing well, but we need to be able to find ways to ensure that banks give young Nigerians and businesses access to credit. And so while we've seen a lot of progress in these areas, the reason why the common man, for instance, isn't seeing all this progress is because a lot of Nigerians still don't have access to loans. A lot of Nigerians still don't have access to credit. The information we have, for instance, shows that less than 4,000 Nigerians account for over 80% of the money the banks have given out. And so we've seen progress in security, we've seen progress in infrastructure, but we need to be able to get credit to much more Nigerians than we currently have been able to have done in the past.
Three priorities of the change agenda of the present administration is security, anti-corruption, war, and the economy, among others. Do you think we've taken big steps towards achieving this? I'm bringing the question to you again. Three priorities of this present administration is the security, anti-corruption, war, and the economy. Anti-corruption, war, and the economy. Corruption, war, and the economy.
Again, corruption is a very sensitive topic that I always try and avoid, because if we start to discuss corruption, we perhaps wouldn't end the show on any other topic other than discussions on corruption. But have we seen recoveries being made by the EFCC? Oh yes, we've seen recoveries being made. There are challenges on the exact figure that has been recovered, but without doubt recoveries have been made. Has the whistleblower policy been effective? The information we have is that over 100 billion naira has been recovered because of the whistleblower policy. However, we've got some not so good news from the global body that ranks corruption within the public sector. And so we've seen good and positive news, and we've seen some negative news when it comes to corruption. But the economy is what Nigerians are concerned about. The number of Nigerians that have no jobs, over 20 million. But here's the good news. We've got 20 million Nigerians that are looking for jobs, but within the same report, it shows that 70 million Nigerians have got jobs. And so while on one side, on one hand, we need to find a solution to boost private sector investments, because it's through the private sector that we can create jobs, not through the public sector. So we need to put more emphasis on promoting programs and policies that will encourage the private sector to invest and give Nigerians jobs, while the government is focused more on policies rather than trying to create jobs. There's a limit to the number of jobs governments can create, but there's no limit to the number of jobs that the private sector can create. But in the final analysis, let's remember the words of Mahatma Gandhi before he died in 1948. He says, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And so we cannot leave it all to the government. We ourselves have to play our role in ensuring that we act as responsible citizens, especially when it comes to managing our population, ensuring that we are all not just givers of bribe and we're also not collecting bribes. There are several areas that we can't keep looking up to the government as our big brother for progress. We also need to be able to make more progress by ourselves.
And on that final analysis, we would like to thank you, Babajide Ogusanwo, an information analyst, for coming on Good Morning Nigeria this morning. Thank you so much for coming.
All right, so back to our Abuja studios. Earlier you were talking about the debt profile at the takeoff of the current administration. Are you satisfied with the current debt management strategy?
Yeah, I am. And I think it's quite creative. One, immediately, or rather, institutional analysis of our debt profile in 2015 showed a very skewed domestic foreign debt profile. I think at that time it was 73% to 27% ratio between local and foreign debt. And of course, what that means is that we were paying more to service our debt because the interest rate, cost of debt in Nigeria is quite high, you know. At the time, it went as high as 21%, 23%, you know. And so there was, and of course, the foreign debt was ranging between 6 and 9%. So it only makes sense that you try and rebalance the profiling so that you can enjoy the benefit of the two worlds. Why we don't support total extermination of domestic debt, because domestic debt also help oil the economy, the local economy. You also want to reduce the cost of servicing the debt by exploiting foreign debt. So over time, I think there's a balance. It's already over 30%. So it's a 70. I think the last figure, it's between 65 and 67 to 32-33 ratio. The target is 60-40 ratio, and I think that equilibrium should be okay. One, to keep our domestic financial sector going, then to also reduce the service the debt cost of debt, you know, servicing debt. So I feel good about that. In fact, to the extent that, and I think this should also be commended. Normally, government rule over debts, you know, but the debt management office, through the approval of the government, decided to pay down a percentage of our local debts. And that is creative, because what it does is to reduce the burden of the total debt, as it were, and also by extension reduce the cost of debt, as it were. So I think it's good going forward.
All right, Neya Kinsiju, investment and financial analyst, thank you for being with us on the program today.
My pleasure, always.
We also would like to thank Aliyu Abdullahi, a lawyer and policy analyst. Thank you, Aliyu, for being on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Now, moving on, we're going to foreign news. Belgium to play host to former Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo after his conditional release by the International Criminal Court, ICC, last month. Details of this with Oyeyemi Ajayi.
Former Ivory Coast President